Welcome to another Rewind review, and in this video we return to the world of Panem to take a look at the second instalment of the Hunger Games series, and that is Catching Fire. Released in 2013 and based on the novel by Suzanne Collins. The Hunger Games Catching Fire sees Katniss, Everdeen and Peeta Mellark become targets of the capital after their victory in the 74th Hunger Games sparks a rebellion in the Districts of Panem. Adapted for screen by Simon Beaufoy and Michael Arndt, and now under the direction of Francis Lawrence, the movie stars Jennifer Lawrence, Josh Hutcherson, Woody Harrelson, Liam Hemsworth, Elizabeth Banks, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Stanley Tucci, Sam Claflin, Lenny Kravitz, Jenna Malone, Jeffrey Wright and Donald Sutherland. After the success of the first Hunger Games, it pretty much guaranteed that this movie was going to get made. And in a shock to most people these days, it came out the following year. Okay, it was 20 months later, so nearly 2 years, but even so, that is so much better than how long it takes to get a season of TV these days. And I was so excited for this. This was one of my most anticipated movies of 2013 outside of Iron Man 3, Man of Steel or Star Trek Into Darkness. By the time this movie had released, I was a proper fan. I absolutely loved the first movie, and by this point in time I had read all 3 books, so I finally understood how this world works. And I was really curious how they were going to and how much of the book they were going to adapt, and whether or not you needed to read the book in order to understand it like the first one did. And while yes, this does skip over a few things and does remove a few sequences, this is still incredibly faithful to the book. And as a bonus, I think this movie is a lot easier to understand without the need for prior knowledge, apart from what happened in the first movie. And this became my favourite of the series. And seeing as though we're almost 1 year out from Sunrise on the Reaping being released, it seemed like a good time to continue these reviews. So without further ado, let's dive into the Hunger Games Catching Fire. In this instalment, which picks up roughly a year or so after the 74th annual Hunger Games, a traumatised Katniss Everdeen and Peeta Mellark are forced to go on something called the Victor's Tour, which involves visiting every district in Panem. But due to their defiance in the previous games, President Snow orders Katniss to stamp out the flames of a possible uprising against the capital, or everyone she cares about will be put in danger. And in a shocking development, as the 75th annual Hunger Games begins, the third quarter quell, Katniss and Peeta find themselves forced back into the arena once again, this time to face off against previous victors in the ultimate fight for survival, testing Katniss like never before. So there's a bit more happening in this instalment, and a lot of it builds off of what happened in the first film. Do you need to see the first movie? Yes, without question. That said, I do think that you could potentially go into this movie without having seen the first movie and still have a great experience. It does do a pretty decent job of filling you in on what happened last time, but you will be missing out on a lot. So yes, I do think that you need to see the first Hunger Games beforehand, and you will definitely be watching Mockingjay afterwards. This is the middle chapter of the series. It furthers, pushes and develops multiple elements from the first film, and helps set the stage for the impending war between the capital and the 12 districts, where Katniss and the other tributes come from. This is the Empire Strikes Back or the Two Towers of the Hunger Games series. And like both of those movies, as I said, this is my favourite of the series. It feels darker, it feels grittier with more suspense and tension, if that's even possible. The scope of this movie feels much wider, and it's a much bigger movie overall, partly due to the fact that in this instalment we get to visit the other 11 districts. Because Katniss and Peeta won the Hunger Games, they have to take part in something called the Victor's Tour, where they have to travel to each of the districts in Panem to spread the word of the generosity of the capital. But there's also an ulterior motive behind this particular tour, because of the manner and means that Katniss and Peeta used to survive the games. Remember, there's only supposed to be the one winner. This has led to a spark of a potential uprising against the capital, hence why this one is called Catching Fire. And Katniss and Peeta are essentially being used to stamp this spark out. So while this could have been a potentially dull first act, there's a gradual sense of building tension, and that tension fills every moment because you know what's going to happen if Katniss fails. Just before the tour begins, Katniss is confronted by President Snow and ordered to calm things down, even very softly threatening all her loved ones. That is one of my favourite scenes in this series. This is the movie that really highlights and drives home the cruelty of the capital. You see the extreme measures that they are happily able to go to keep the districts in their place. And this is the first time that the peacekeepers feel legitimately threatening, including one sequence that I honestly didn't think would be adapted, which sees Gale on the receiving end of a public whipping. How these movies keep getting away with a 12A rating, I will never know. Catching Fire, like the first movie, is pretty brutal and does push a few boundaries at times. It's very intense at times and it pushes that age rating to its limits. But that said, I love that that scene was included and the importance of it is retained. And the reason why is because this is the moment that the 75th Hunger Games properly starts. Katniss, Peeta and Haymitch all standing up to Peacekeeper Thread in full view of everyone, including the people watching at home, is the action that gets Snow, with a little influence from Heavensby, to change what the Quarter Quell will be. I really am amazed just how much they were able to adapt into this without it ever feeling messy. It manages to cover all the important stuff, but still finds time to include some of the smaller character moments like where Katniss and Peeta are getting to know each other and asking things like what their favourite colours are, or the bit with the pearl on the beach. They could quite easily have cut that moment because it does seem quite small and insignificant, but they didn't, and I'm glad. It helps build the characters up, it's a turning point in their relationship, and it does flesh them out a little bit more, and I really like that inclusion. Not bad for a 2.5 hour long film. It definitely could have been a lot longer. There's a lot of other things that weren't included from the books, like the stuff involving the Avoxes or Plutarch's pocket watch, but it does work as is. You don't need to read the books in order to understand what's happening. It streamlines the story and it makes it feel much more like a film. It doesn't explain why the cat is now a completely different breed. Anyway, the books are definitely worth a read if you get the chance. Right, let's talk about the characters. As this is a sequel, the bulk of the main cast are returning actors reprising their roles from the first film, and chief among them is Jennifer Lawrence returning as Katniss Everdeen. It pretty much goes without saying, she is once again brilliant and gets to show a much more vulnerable yet aggressive and angrier side to Katniss. After the events of the first game, she's developed PTSD and has almost daily nightmares. And with Snow threatening Katniss's family, there's a lot more of a sense of anxiety and pressure that starts to come through as everyone sees her as some kind of symbol. And this is what gets built on in Mockingjay. I think my favourite acting moment with her is when it gets announced that she's going back into the games. How she's able to capture every single emotion that Katniss is feeling in that one moment. It's incredible, and the way that sequence is shot helps too. She's a very internal character in the books, and that's why Jennifer Lawrence is so good in this role. You may not be able to hear her thoughts, but the way that Jennifer plays Katniss, you never need to. It may be quite a subtle performance at times, but everything is on screen, and that's why she's so good in this role. Plus, now that she knows she's going back into the arena and her goal becomes about making sure that Peeta survives, we get to see the real Katniss during the build-up to the games. Not the happier and nervous person she was, trying to get sponsors and playing up to the cameras. She has no reason to hide anymore, and I love this. I do question how agile she suddenly is, especially that bit in the training room where she's fighting off all the holograms, but it is a cool scene, so I can't really complain. The rule of cool. But I love the more confident character she becomes, and she's more familiar with what to expect when she's in the games. She's no longer holding back, and that's only fueled by what Snow puts her through. She is honestly fantastic, and Jennifer's performance is excellent again. Also returning is Josh Hutcherson as Katniss's fellow tribute Peeta, and Liam Hemsworth as Gale. I feel like both of them do an excellent job once again, and like Katniss, they both get more to do with their characters, especially Gale, who does have a slightly more prominent role this time, and we see the foundations being laid for where he ultimately is by the time we get to Mockingjay. And then with Peeta, I feel really sorry for him at times during this one, considering everything he's been through, and much of it has had to be an act. The chemistry between them all, mainly their dynamic with Katniss, I think is really good. This is the movie where the love triangle properly becomes a thing. I do at the time remember people comparing this with Twilight because apparently no other story has a love triangle. I thought it was an insult to this movie just even thinking about comparing the two. Anyway, how the Peeta side of it is played is a slow burn, and I love how it builds over the movie. It's presented in a realistic, awkward manner because they haven't really spent a lot of time together since the games. But he and Katniss do genuinely care for each other. With Peeta, it's obvious. But with Katniss, she herself doesn't seem to be aware just how much she cares for him, and that's very obvious during the multiple times that his life is in danger. It certainly helps that the two of them do have a shared trauma and they do understand what each other is going through, and they both know the best way to help each other. With Gale, there's a history between Katniss and him, and you see how comfortable Katniss is around him, and how much Gale cares for both her and her family. The love triangle is one of the cliches that many young adult novels do tend to follow, but I do think that it does work quite well in this one. And I've got to be honest, I do like how it's done in this. It feels more natural, I should say. They're actual characters played perfectly by brilliant actors, and because of that it does help sell this aspect of the story a bit more. But anyway, I really do like what they do with these two this time. Same with Haymitch, played once again by the brilliant Woody Harrelson. Haymitch is arguably my favourite character in this series, and I love how he's used. He still takes on the mentor role he had last time, and that's a crucial element for him in this movie, as he helps Katniss and Peeta navigate the tour and during the 75th games. He's the one who teaches them about their fellow tributes. He still has his own trauma which he drinks away, but you really do see how much he cares for both of them, and that's why he's such a good character. He also adds some much needed humour as well. Not a huge amount, but just enough to add a little bit of levity, because believe me, this one needs it. I really love this character and I think he's brilliant. Same with Effie, played again by Elizabeth Banks and the rest of her troupe, as well as Lenny Kravitz back as Cinna, and Paula Malcolmson as Katniss's mum, and Willow Shields as Prim. Plus, we also see the return of my other favourite character, Caesar Flickerman, played by the always watchable Stanley Tucci. I really like what they do with Effie and Flickerman in this one, because in this movie, you start to see the cracks in their very positive exteriors. Flickerman obviously puts on the act of somebody really sympathetic towards the tributes, but you see how much he doesn't like it when things go out of his control. And with Effie, I love that she starts to have doubts about the capital and helps in her own way. And with Cinna, It's always been obvious whose side he's on, and in this one, he doesn't hide it, which leads to a pretty shocking scene. And then of course, we also have President Snow, once again played by Donald Sutherland. Snow is a lot more prominent this time around, and because of that, we do feel the threat he does pose to both Katniss and her family, as well as a few cracks in the armour when he starts to realise that things are getting out of control in the districts. And a big part of that is through Donald's performance, which is excellent once again. He may appear quite calm and smooth whenever he talks, but there's a lot going on behind his eyes. There's a burning intensity and anger towards Katniss and what's happening in the districts, and it's brilliant. Donald is still one of the best casting decisions in this series, and this is why. I think he is an amazing villain. Now, as this is the next chapter in the series, we do get introduced to several new characters, some of who became fan favourites. A big one is the new games maker, Plutarch Heavensbee, played perfectly by Philip Seymour Hoffman. He's one of those characters that's quite mysterious and you're not entirely sure how to feel about him. He has more prominence in this than he does in the book because, once again, there's several sequences that have been added to show what's happening with Snow, and I love those additions. And I think he's brilliantly played, and I love all the little clues and hints towards what's actually going on with him. There is a bit more of a mystery element in this movie because Katniss is being kept in the dark about what's going on. The slow reveal, I think, is perfectly done, and I think that it all makes sense by the end. It slowly unfolds over the course of the movie, and I think that it ends in a pretty perfect place. Anyway, and as for the new tributes, in a big twist, they are all previous winners from previous Hunger Games. And the reason being is that this is the 75th annual Hunger Games, and that's known as a Quarter Quell. And that's a special event Hunger Games that takes place every 25 years. The previous one is the one that Haymitch wins, and that's what Sunrise on the Reaping is all about. Anyway, these include characters like Finnick Odair, played by Sam Claflin, who's another character that's hard to read, but as the film progresses, you see how loyal he is and how skilled he is with a trident. And I think he develops into a really great character. We meet Joanna Mason, played by Jenna Malone, who is one of the more entertaining and outspoken tributes, and the source of one of the funniest scenes in the movie, which again, I am really surprised they adapted. It's Jennifer Lawrence's reaction during that scene that gets me. It's the least Katniss she feels in the entire movie, but I do think that it is warranted. We also meet the strange but brilliant Wyrus and Beatty, played by Amanda Plummer and Jeffrey Wright, who have a very important role to play. Plus, there's also appearances from people like Lynn Cohen, Megan Hayes, and even Alan Richardson. There's some really good talent in this one, and I do think that everyone does what's required of them. But of course, with the new Hunger Games comes a new arena, as well as all the build up towards it. This does retread a lot of familiar ground as the first film, but it's part of the Hunger Games event. It's built up a lot quicker, and there's the added twist of the former tributes actively pushing back against doing it. Plus, Katniss and Peeta are now forced to make alliances with the other tributes, which does add a layer of uneasiness and paranoia to this section of the film. But as for the actual arena, I've got to be honest, this is the most creative one in the entire series. This one is like a tropical island with water and a beach in the centre, and surrounding it is this dense jungle that's populated by some nasty creatures, or mutts as they're known in this world. We don't see all the perils, but we do see enough to understand just how dangerous and horrifying this arena is. The arena section in the first movie was a lot quieter overall because it focused on the tributes hunting each other. There wasn't as many hazards for them to encounter. This one is a lot more action-packed with a good dose of horror thrown in for good measure, and it's balanced out really well. And I've got to say, it's much more cinematic too. I do miss the slightly grounded, more indie feel that the first movie had, but I do think that it does suit this movie quite well. The sequence with the poisonous fog is really intense and a little spooky. The part with the monkeys is very well choreographed, and the bit with the Jabberjays is really unsettling and properly rattles the characters. And best of all, no shaky cam. That was a big complaint that the first movie had, and I'm glad that Francis Lawrence fixed it. As great a director as Gary Ross was, I do think that Francis Lawrence was the best choice to take over, and I'm really glad that he stayed on. His style really suits this world, and I love what he's done with the series. It still maintains the grittiness of the first movie, but it does feel a lot bigger with much more focus on the disparity between the districts and the capital. From the harsh, snow-covered world that the districts have become, which I love the decision for, to the special drinks that they have in the capital that makes everyone sick, just so they can go on and try every bit of food. I'm really glad that was included. This really drives home just how different both of those worlds are. And speaking of the look of the districts, I really love the production design in this one. It definitely feels a lot grander than before, and I love the use of real-world locations both within the capital and during the games. It is still a pretty practical movie, and this stuff is great. The hair, the makeup, and the costumes, there's some brilliant and creative designs, especially the redesigned Peacekeeper uniforms, and the wetsuits they wear during the games. There is some effects-driven sequences in this, mainly in the arena, and this is another aspect that has been improved on. It's still not perfect, and there is definitely some mixed green screen moments, but honestly, the effects in this movie look way better than they did in the first film, especially the mutts, which aren't hidden in shadows this time, and the fire effects are just mwah. If you didn't know this movie had a bigger budget, you definitely will by the time they get to the arena. And lastly, James Newton Howard is back on musical composer duties. and he's knocked it out of the park once again. This is a powerful, suitable, effective, tension-driven soundtrack that is perfect for this series. It features a lot of returning themes from the first movie, but it does sprinkle a few new ones in as well. And some of the new stuff I really like, especially the opening theme. I love that. And yes, like the first movie, this also has a tie-in album that features songs that do appear within the movie. Well, in the credits. I'll admit, they're not my favourites, but there is some good ones featured in this. And I definitely think it is worth listening to. Overall, this is a brilliant movie and a worthy follow-up that manages to surpass the original. It has a great story that builds off of what has come before, further develops the brilliant characters, and does a fine job of bridging the gap and setting the stage for what is to come. The performances are excellent, the effects are mostly good, the production design is brilliant, the music is amazing, it's action-packed, darker, it's thought-provoking and gripping, with a small dose of horror and mystery thrown in for good measure. If I'm being honest, I do think this movie could probably slow down just a little bit, and some of the effects do need a little bit of a tweak, but it's a highly entertaining and suspenseful watch, and I think this is definitely worth checking out. Just make sure you see the first one before jumping into this. I really love this movie. It was one of my favourites from 2013. I am so happy with how it turned out, and it left me really excited for what comes next. So with all that being said, my rating for The Hunger Games Catching Fire is a 9 out of 10. Well, that is pretty much everything I want to say for this video, so if you have watched this video, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button. If you have seen The Hunger Games Catching Fire, let me know down in the comments what you think about it and which movie in the series is your favourite. Plus, if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews, let me know down below. I will be continuing this series with a review for Mockingjay Part 1, and that'll be out early next year, so keep an eye out for it. But until next time, thank you very much for watching, and may the odds be ever in your favour. See you guys.